Day two, and in the last few hours we've seen prosecutors from the House of Representatives, or also known as the House managers, giving their arguments. And bear in mind, these prosecutors are actually representatives from the House of Representatives assuming these roles while the trial is playing out. Now, Adam Schiff, to give him his title during this trial, is the lead impeachment manager. Let's have a listen to him.
President Trump solicited foreign interference in our democratic elections, abusing the power of his office to seek help from abroad to improve his re-election prospects at home. And when he was caught, he used the powers of that office to obstruct the investigation into his own misconduct. But most pernicious, President Trump conditioned hundreds of millions of dollars in congressionally appropriated, taxpayer-funded military assistance for the same purpose, to apply more pressure on Ukraine's leader to announce the investigations. This military aid, which has long enjoyed bipartisan support, was designed to help Ukraine defend itself from the Kremlin's aggression. More than 15,000 Ukrainians have died fighting Russian forces and their proxies. 15,000.
Well, Adam Schiff is one of the 7 prosecutors in this trial. They're, in fact, as I was saying, Democratic members of the House of Representatives, as well as Mr. Schiff, who's the Intelligence Committee chairman. There's also the Judiciary Committee chairman, Jerry Nadler. Both of them frequently criticised Donald Trump. Both are frequently criticised by the president. And here's another example from Davos today.
Gerald Nadler, I've known him a long time. He's a sleazebag. Everybody knows that.
Well, the president's defence in this trial includes a range of figures, some unknown, some very well known. Let's start with Ken Starr. He was the special prosecutor who drove the impeachment process during Bill Clinton's presidency. You can see a picture of him 20 years ago. This is him giving a press conference at the time in the late 90s. These days, Ken Starr is also, as you were seeing, a regular contributor to Fox News. Another figure, Larry Kudlow, was also a Fox commentator. Now he's a White House economic advisor. Also in President Trump's legal team for this trial is Alan Dershowitz. He became a celebrity in the 90s when he successfully defended O.J. Simpson, big sports star, against murder charges. He also, later on, defended the billionaire paedophile Jeffrey Epstein when he was facing multiple charges of soliciting and trafficking underage girls. Now, Jeffrey Epstein served 13 months under house arrest after a plea deal, and Mr. Dershowitz was involved in negotiating that. That plea deal was agreed with another figure, Alex Acosta, who was a U.S. attorney in Florida at the time, but much, much later he became the transport secretary in Donald Trump's administration. There's also a connection between Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein. They knew each other for years. Here they are at a party in the 90s. Epstein took his life while in custody last year as he faced a range of charges, and also that plea deal in Florida was deemed illegal by a federal judge. Now, back to Alex Acosta, because much more recently he had to resign as Transport Secretary because of his role in that Epstein plea deal. Donald Trump, though, as we've been discussing, is now turning to Alan Dershowitz, who was on the other side of that plea deal. Also in Mr. Trump's team, White House counsel Pat Cipollone and Donald Trump's personal lawyer, Jay Sekulow. They're going to head the president's legal team, although if we're realistic, probably Ken Starr and Alan Dershowitz are going to be the marquee names and may well steal quite a lot of the limelight. We'll see in the coming days. Now, the Senate spent 13 hours yesterday debating the ground rules for the trial. It was eventually agreed that each side will be given up to 24 hours to lay out their opening arguments. Those 24 hours each will stretch across 3 days. Mitch McConnell is a key figure in this story. He's the most senior Republican in the Senate. He'd hoped to do the whole thing in 2 days, but the Democrats pushed for more. He agreed and granted 3. The greater disagreement, though, is on the issue of whether to call witnesses, and there is no agreement on that yet. Here's the Democratic leader in the Senate, Chuck Schumer.
The fact that McConnell had to change his resolution showed that Republicans can make this trial more fair if they want to. It's not a question of ability. They can, if they want. It's a question of conscience. Senate Republicans have the power in their hands to make it a fair trial. Will they use it when it matters? The next real test will come after Q&A, when we revisit the issue of witnesses and documents.
Let's bring in the BBC's Anthony Circa in Washington, D.C. Hi, Anthony. Where have we got to?
Well, we're at a break after more than 3 hours of opening statements by Adam Schiff. I guess 2.5 hours of opening statements by Adam Schiff, the lead impeachment manager. Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, called a brief recess. Adam Schiff was about to hand it over to the rest of his impeachment management team, although he had essentially laid out the big picture groundwork of this case against Donald Trump. I think what you're going to see for the rest of the day going on in the evening is more specific focus on each individual charge and components of that being raised by members of the team that Nancy Pelosi appointed, and they'll each have their own briefs, and I think we'll just be ticking through them. Expect more of the same, more videotape of testimony before the House of Representatives, videotape of Donald Trump himself speaking publicly, and any other documents that the House, as part of their investigation, had managed to get their hands on.
No, I don't mean to undercut the plans of anyone who's planning to watch back all 2.5 hours of Adam Schiff, but did he tell us anything he hasn't told us before?
No. It was if you've been following this and you followed those House impeachment hearings with the series of witnesses from the administration and other sources coming forward to testify, what Adam Schiff went over was essentially what you had heard then. He mixed it in with some grandiose language, quoting Alexander Hamilton and other members of the founding fathers of the United States, and citations of the Constitution and law. But in a sense, he was repeating and restating the case as a whole. I mean, you got to remember, a lot of this we found about in bits and pieces, and testimony came here and there were revelations all along the way over the past couple of months. What Adam Schiff was doing was trying his best to package it all up and put it before the senators and really before the public watching at home to make his case against the president.
Okay, Anthony, stay with us, please. Let's look at a couple of other elements of this story. The Democrats want to hear from key White House aides who work closely with Mr. Trump. On their list, well, certainly acting Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney, and also, and perhaps even more importantly, John Bolton, the former National Security Advisor. But most Republicans opposed these men giving witness testimony. In fact, Republican senators blocked an earlier effort by Democrats to subpoena Mr. Bolton. And if you go back a couple of weeks, John Bolton released this statement. And in it, he said, if there was a subpoena, I am prepared to testify. But so far, he hasn't been called on to back that statement up. Remember, he's a key figure in the Ukraine scandal, and his lawyer has been saying quite clearly Mr. Bolton was part of many relevant meetings and conversations pertaining to this House impeachment inquiry that are not yet public, he says. I guess the question is whether Mr. Bolton will make them public. Well, Donald Trump turned today in Davos to the possibility of John Bolton giving evidence.
It's a national security problem. You know, you can't have somebody who's at national security. And if you think about it, John, he knows some of my thoughts. He knows what I think about leaders. What happens if he reveals what I think about a certain leader and it's not very positive?
Donald Trump's been tweeting about this as well. They didn't want John Bolton and others in the House. They were in too much of a rush. Now they want them all in the Senate. It's not supposed to be that way. I mean, that is not a fair representation of what happened. I was mentioning John Bolton's statement. Well, in that, he also said, after my counsel informed the House committee that I too would seek judicial resolution of these constitutional issues, the committee chose not to subpoena me. And that basically meant it would have been up to the courts to decide whether he has to comply with either the White House order not to testify or with Congress's subpoena in the House impeachment inquiry. We'll see what happens at the end of that saga. Also at the issue is the release of documents. Senators blocked a motion from Democratic leader Chuck Schumer to subpoena the White House to release files relating to Mr. Trump's dealings with Ukraine. They also rejected follow-up motions demanding a subpoena of records and documents from the State Department and from the White House Budget Office. That's important because one of the charges against the president is obstructing Congress. Well, he's accused, and this is a direct quote here from the here of directing the unprecedented, categorical and indiscriminate defiance of subpoenas issued by the House of Representatives. We also know that Chuck Schumer is decidedly unimpressed. He's been saying a trial with no evidence is not a trial at all, it's a cover-up. Now, during the impeachment trial of Bill Clinton in the late 90s, 90,000 pages of documents and other information were handed over. But we should be clear, there's no set way of doing an impeachment trial, and just because this is different doesn't necessarily mean it's inappropriate. Here's more from Chuck Schumer.
Yesterday, we put the spotlight on the number one issue in having a fair trial, witnesses and documents. That's just where the spotlight belonged. And I predict that as a result, that spotlight will continue to focus on witnesses and documents, and the pressure will continue to build on Republican senators.
Well, President Trump insists he would love to appear at this impeachment trial and for other witnesses to be called, but he's also saying that's a decision for the Senate.
I'll leave that to the Senate. The Senate's going to have to answer that. I have great respect for the Senate as a body and many of the individuals.
Back to Anthony, and I guess Mr. Trump's keen on the Senate, Anthony, because the Republicans have a majority.
Yeah, I mean, it's a matter of simple math. There are 100 senators. 53 are Republican, 47 are Democratic. It would take 67 votes to convict and remove Donald Trump from the presidency. So those 47 Democrats, if they stuck together, would have to peel off 20 Republican senators. And that's just not moderate senators, ones who may be facing tough elections later this year, or ones who might be more open to bucking the party line. That would involve convincing senators who are from traditionally reliable Republican states where Donald Trump is still very popular. Essentially, it would require some Republican senators, unless something changes fundamentally on the ground, to commit political suicide. So that is why I think Donald Trump feels confident that the process is going to vindicate him in this chamber. He feels confident Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, who has proven to be a very savvy political operator, very good at using the powers of his position and pushing through and getting his way politically in that chamber, to come through for him in the end.
And Anthony, I've got a question about the Republican tactics. We know the president has attacked both the process and the fact that he did anything wrong. Do we know what strategy the Republicans in the Senate will take in pushing back at these allegations?
Well, you know, at least for the initial phase, the Republicans in the Senate don't have to do anything. They can largely keep silent. You've seen some of them take to press conferences. Lindsey Graham, before the hearing today, the beginning of the arguments today, had a press conference where he spoke to the press, and he was very adamant in defending the president. Said that the proceedings in the House, as you had mentioned before, were rushed, that they were not thorough, that the framework of evidence that they put together was not sufficient, which is why they're trying to get new witnesses and subpoena new documents on the Senate side. And he thinks that this entire thing should be over as quickly as possible, that the Democrats aren't making their case. But I think there are other Republicans who may be perfectly happy to keep their mouths shut, to vote to acquit the president, and then hope all of this goes away so they can focus on other things.